People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.
Good evening. Welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring women-owned businesses from across the country. And now, for your host, Kimberly McLemore.
All right, good evening and welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses from across the country. I am your host, Kimberly McLemore, and welcome to a special edition of tonight's show. With us we have Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts. Dr. Gleb Tsipursky is a cognitive neuroscientist and expert on behavioral economics and decision-making. As CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, he spent over 2 decades consulting, coaching, speaking, and training hundreds of clients across North America, Europe, and Australia, including Aflac, IBM, Honda, Wells Fargo, and the World Wildlife Fund. With over 15 years in academia, including 7 as a professor at Ohio State University, he published dozens of peer-reviewed pieces in academic journals, such as Behavior and Social Issues and the Journal of Social and Political Psychology. His thought leadership is featured in Fast Company, CBS News, Time, CNBC, Inc. magazine, and elsewhere. Dr. Tsipursky is the best-selling author of several books, best known for his national bestseller, Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. It's the first book to focus on cognitive biases in business leadership and reveal how leaders can overcome these dangerous judgment errors effectively. So without further ado, please help me welcome to my platform, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much for inviting me on the show, Kimberly. It's a pleasure.
Oh, I am excited to have you on, sir, and really looking into diving into nice discussion and kind of having a great conversation. But before we do all of that, just please tell my listeners just a little bit more about who Dr. Gleb Tsipursky is.
Well, I'm a disaster avoidance expert, so my goal is to help folks avoid all sorts of disasters, specifically in their business life. So business disasters, and by business disasters, what is a business disaster? It's anything that's a serious negative impact on your bottom line. So any serious negative impact, that's what I want to help folks avoid. Now, when you look at disasters, what the research on this topic finds is that it comes from all our decisions. Our decisions lead to disasters, and there's 2 types of decisions that lead to disaster. Either an active decision that we make that leads to a disaster, or a series of decisions. So an active decision can be a bad merger or acquisition. An active decision can be choosing to launch a product in the wrong market. Mm-hmm. An active decision could be a series of decisions where you gradually escalate conflicts that could have been avoided with a business partner or a key employee, and they end up leaving, and it really hurts your business. So that's active decision making. But you can also make the second type of decision that leads to disasters is passive decision making, where you fail to make a decision that you really should have made. So let's say you fail to notice that a product is reaching the end of its growth cycle, and you really should start investing and investigating your next product. But you fail to understand that, and then your business starts going downhill. Or you fail to realize that a pandemic that starts in the middle of China can actually reach the U.S. and be a major, major disaster. Mm-hmm. So that's another sort of disastrous decision that many people made, and we can talk about why. My expertise is in examining why we make such decisions. All of these decisions, all of these disastrous decisions, either are active decisions or are passive decisions where we fail to make a decision. They can all be avoided. We can defend ourselves against them. We can protect ourselves against them. And they come from a series of dangerous judgment errors because of how our brain is wired, which are known as cognitive biases. And my expertise specifically is in studying these cognitive biases. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist and behavioral economist, as you kindly pointed out. So I study cognitive neuroscience is about the structure of our brain and how it works. And behavioral economics is how we as human beings behave in economic situations. So I study these two topics combined. Specifically, I study about these decision errors, these cognitive biases, and my particular expertise is how to debias ourselves, how to address dangerous judgment errors so that we don't screw up our business and that we thrive and survive and thrive. Not simply survive. You want to thrive in your business.
Right.
And that's my goal, to help folks, my clients, thrive, and everyone actually thrive in their business.
Well, let me ask, before we continue to dive more into everything that you just explained in a summarized way, I want to ask you, how did you actually get inspired, and what made you want to look into this type of work to understand what we do as business owners making these type of decisions? But what really inspired you first to do this? I mean, obviously you've gone through years of schooling and, you have made some incredible things going on in your life and helping others, but what really pushed you to this?
Well, what pushed me to that was seeing my parents make a series of dangerous judgment errors themselves. I actually got started in this business as a kid, not as a business, but as an observer. I saw my parents making some really bad choices in their financial life that really hurt them, hurt my family, led to a lot of conflict. So, for example, my mom liked to buy nice clothing, so she'd go out, she'd buy a $100 sweater. My dad was kind of a cheapskate, so he'd come home, and he'd yell at her, say, no sweater should be worth over $20. And then she'd bring up a past thing that he did, forgetting to put down, to leave the toilet seat up or something like that. And then he'd bring up a thing she did, and that it would all roll downhill from there into a major, shouting match. So that was something that I observed happen many times over. And you know what? It was really frustrating for me. I mean, as a kid, it was really painful for me to see my parents having these stupid fights, but also having them repeatedly, the same pattern over and over again, leading to the same fights, leading to the same conflicts, and neither of them changed their behavior. That's the definition of insanity, one of the definitions of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I was wondering, why do we do this? Why do they make these sorts of decisions that lead to such disastrous consequences? And I was hoping that somebody would, one day sit me down and say, hey, kiddo, here's how you make good decisions. Here's how you make bad ones. Don't make the ones that your parents made. But nobody did. It didn't happen to me. My friends certainly didn't teach me that. My parents certainly didn't teach me that. It wasn't there in elementary school. It wasn't there in middle school. It wasn't there in high school. It wasn't there in college. And business school doesn't teach about decision making. It talks about supply, demand, macroeconomics, microeconomics, but not good decision making, not how we screw up our decisions. So I was growing up. I saw that it wasn't simply my parents. As I was growing older, I saw that it was the whole society around me. I was born in 1981, so I came of age in 1999. For those who remember that time, when tech leaders were partying like it's 1999. For people who remember that Prince song, I don't know, maybe it's me. But anyway, so the tech leaders were the heroes in the Wall Street Journal. But just a couple of years later, all the companies, Webvan, Pets.com, Boo.com, that were booming in 1999, they all went bust. And so people who were heroes in the Wall Street Journal in 1999 were now the zeros, the titans of the industry, the people who were praised as the best decision makers of all time were now the worst decision makers of all time. And nothing changed. It was just their luck. They were lucky in 1999. They were unlucky in 2002. Clearly, they didn't know how to make good decisions. And all the stories that were spun about their brilliant decision-making that so many people internalized were falsehoods, because we see what happens. So I wanted to study what was going on with the decision-making. And that's when I started studying this topic, and I became people started asking me about it. I started training them in it as I started learning more. So I became a coach, consultant, trainer. I've been doing that since for about 20 years. So that's kind of one aspect of what I do, consulting, coaching, training for everything from entrepreneurial startups to Fortune 500 companies, like the ones you mentioned, ranging from Aflac to Xerox. And I also went into academia because it's really where you study decision making. That's how I found out, because the popular decision making out there, it's like kind of the Tony Robbins spiel of be primal, be savage, go with your gut, go with what feels right, do what your instincts tell you to do, being primal, being savage, same thing, right?
Right.
So that was not really helpful for my parents. That was not really helpful for a lot of people. They made terrible decisions. There's a reason, about half of all startups fail within the first 5 years.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.
About 3/4 fail within the first 15 years because people go with their gut. People follow their intuitions. They buy hook, line, and sinker into these myths. And so I studied what's going on. Why do we make such bad decisions? And the cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics really explain the details of that. Why we make such bad decisions and how, I learned about all the ways that I was screwed up. I was making bad decisions. That was kind of sad. But at least I was able to learn how to address these problems. Okay. So I went into academia and I started studying these topics.
Okay, but let me ask you just a quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to find out, now obviously, like you said, you talked about the fact that here your parents were constantly making the bad decisions, and everybody that you were around or seeing and all through school did the same thing. And I was just going to ask you that same question. What bad decisions did you make throughout trying to understand yourself and the understanding of why we do make these bad decisions? And of course, like you said, you've made those decisions, bad decisions, but how did you get yourself out of making those bad decisions beyond just going to school and learning about how the brain works? What things rattled you to say, hey, you know what, this can't be right. I'm actually going into the same path that my family has gone through and that what I've been taught all through school, even in college. So what broke you into saying, these are the things I need to do better and for you, in order for you to help others beyond going through school and understanding the brain itself?
Well, there was a time specifically when my wife and I, when we were thinking about buying a house. And so we're looking at buying a house, and we looked at kind of the options. We were in North Carolina at the time, going to school, evaluating, going to college, evaluating the options, evaluating what's available. And we saw a good house that we thought was right for us. We put in a down payment. And then we called my wife's parents, and they are really much more savvy in many ways than my own parents. And they said, well, hey, I see that you're able to afford the down payment and you can afford the mortgage, but have you thought about all the other costs associated with the house? Have you thought about maintenance? Have you thought about all these utilities? And a number of other costs that they talked about, and kind of being, instability. What if you move? We have to sell this house. And what they brought up, it made me realize that my decision-making was way too optimistic, that I was way too positive about spending money and making decisions. And, I wanted that house, and damn it, I was going to get that house.
Right.
And I didn't think through all the costs, all the problems, all the risks, all the threats. What if the roof started leaking? Did we have an extra $5,000 to spare? No, we didn't. Right now here in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm based, I literally just on the 16th. So just this is July 23rd. On the 16th, they replaced the people replaced our AC, our central air conditioning. We were without an AC for 2 weeks. That was horrible.
No, I can imagine.
Yeah, it cost over $3,600 to replace that.
Right.
In my time right now with my finances, that's fine. I mean, It's not nothing, let's be clear, but it's not like a dangerous thing for me. But if we had bought that house and the AC went out, we didn't have $3,600 to spare. That I was in college and my wife was kind of in a startup job. That we didn't have that money to spare. So that made us realize that we made a bad decision, and we really gritted our teeth and decided to break the contract, leaving the down payment with them. So wasted quite a bit of money with the down payment because we just didn't realistically, we realized that it was really bad to to keep going with it. And that was a really helpful way of addressing something that's one of the cognitive biases, one of the most dangerous cognitive biases out there. So there are two I want to talk about. One is called the optimism bias. And this is something that all entrepreneurs, pretty much all entrepreneurs experience. I'm an entrepreneur, so I have a business of my own, disaster avoidance experts, consulting, coaching, training, and decision-making, risk management, strategic planning, disaster avoidance, right? I started this business, and I know how risky it is. Many entrepreneurs who start their businesses don't know how risky it is. They don't look at statistics about failure. But I'm an optimist, and that is something that is in many ways helpful to me. I look at the world, and I see a world full of opportunities. I see the future as bright. I see the world as mostly a friendly place.
Right.
It helps motivate me, get up and, do new things. So it feels good and it's great. But you know what? I also have 20 ideas before breakfast, and I think they're all brilliant.
Exactly.
I can tell you from this experience, they're not all brilliant. Entrepreneurs, small business owners, they're overwhelmingly, unless it was inherited or something like that, if they start their own business, they're overwhelmingly people like me. People who have a bright vision of the future, who see the future as full of hope and opportunities, and they make so many bad decisions because of it. I talked about how small businesses fail. One of the top two reasons that small businesses fail has to do with not matching the market to your offering. And that's a fundamental optimism mistake, where people who are entrepreneurs are too optimistic that what they have to offer is going to be wanted by the market. And they don't test, and they don't evaluate, and they don't address the risks and the problems. So that's one of the biggest problems, one of the two biggest reasons. The other biggest reason why it fails, and all the other reasons are much, much smaller. The other biggest reason why startups fail, why small businesses fail, is they run out of cash. We've seen a lot of that in the pandemic. Government statistics show that on average, small businesses have about 2 weeks worth of money to keep them going. So they're living paycheck to paycheck, literally. And that's not great. They don't realize the dangers in this, how much you really need to have at least 3 months of savings if you don't want to be one of those businesses that half of all businesses fail within the first 5 years and 3/4 within the first 15 years. They run out of cash. They're too optimistic about their initial budget, and they make lots of mistakes because of this. They don't calculate this out. So you need to address this optimism, and that's one of the things that I learned was within me needing to address the optimism that I just bring to the table. I can talk about that. There are a number of techniques to do that. But I want to talk about a second cognitive bias, second dangerous judgment error. So when you make a deposit in a home, you put, $1,000 down or, $3,000 down, whatever, depends on the value of the home, what they want. So what you have then is you invest money into it, and it's very hard for people to walk away, even if they realize that there's a serious problem with the house or with their choice to make the investment. And then Agnes, my wife and I, Agnes, that's her name, we realized, her parents pointed out to us, how we did not have a financially savvy approach to this, and we made a serious error. And what really helped us walk away from it was realizing the cognitive bias of sunken costs was playing a role. So sunken costs is when you invest money into something, and for small businesses, it can be anything from a location when you're opening a second franchise, third franchise, or it can be launching a new product or a new employee that you hired. When you're making an investment, you feel emotionally attached to this investment, and you're not thinking rationally about, hey, maybe I should let this go. Maybe I should let this employee go. Maybe this franchise, maybe the second location is not working out. Maybe this product is not a good fit for the market. The people just keep throwing good money after bad. And that is a very dangerous error. So knowing about this error, the fundamental first step to addressing these cognitive biases, the optimism bias, sunken costs, any of these biases, is to realize you're falling into them, is to know about them. So my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, looks and evaluates the 30 most dangerous cognitive biases out there for leaders of all sorts, including small business leaders. And it helps them realize when they might be falling into each of these cognitive biases, whether it's optimism bias, whether it's sunken costs, whether it's loss aversion, whether it's confirmation bias, and so many others. 30 cognitive biases. How can you learn that you're falling into them, and then how can you get yourself out of them? So that's what the book is about, and that was what I had to do with this optimism bias and the sunken costs with the house purchase.
Right, and the thing I'm listening to, it sounds like, Dr. Gleb, that what happens is that people take what they do personally and they jump it right into what they're doing professionally and with their businesses. And that's because these cognitive biases that we've carried with us all our lives. So there seems to be that constant circle of disaster there that, that you're trying to get people out of. But how do they get out of it? And why is it such a bad thing to not go with your gut when you have that feeling of, this is the business decision I want to make? And even if some of people may have specifically gone through and done their checking and then, figuring out, hey, this is what's going to take to run this business and so forth, some people still feel like
people are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.
If their gut and their mind aren't in sync, that, are in sync together, they're going to go with it. So what makes people think that way?
Well, the problem with our gut reaction and why people go with it is it's very comfortable. It feels good. And people like what feels good, by definition.
Right.
If it feels good, it feels comfortable. It feels right. It feels like this is the best choice. It feels like this is the right course of action. You have that feeling, and therefore people act on that feeling. They forget that their feelings don't indicate the reality of the situation. They don't indicate whether the information is right. They don't indicate whether the course of action is right. You talked about personal life. We talked about business failure, right? Like, we would not see half of all startups fail within the first 5 years if people's gut reactions was right. Yeah. Now, that's one example. Going into personal life, we wouldn't see about half of all marriages failing. You have a divorce rate like over 40% in the U.S.
Right.
If people's gut reactions about the romantic life was right. So decision-making is not different. Decision-making is fundamentally the same. We make the same mistakes in all life areas because decision-making is the fundamental aspect of what we do as human beings. So we make decisions all the time. What do we choose? Who do we choose as our romantic partner? What group do we belong to? Civic group, community club, church, whatever. How do we spend our free time? Do we eat the donuts or do we eat the fresh fruit? And of course, what kind of business decisions do you make? So that is a fundamental aspect of who we are. And so, unfortunately, our decision-making, what we feel is right, is not wired for the modern environment. So we have to go to our brain now and the cognitive neuroscience. And the cognitive neuroscience of our brain, when we study it, it's shown that our brain is wired for the savanna environment. When we lived in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people. And, once I say it, it becomes obvious. I mean, our modern reality has really been around since World War II. Our brain has not had time to evolve nearly quickly enough to adapt to our modern needs.
Right.
So we are still wired for that savanna environment. We have advanced very much culturally and materially, but our structure of our brains and the structure, of course, of our bodies is still the same. So, for example, our primary response to threats is the fight or flight response. That was great when we faced immense in the immediate and the moment risks in the savanna environment, like saber-toothed tigers. You might have heard of this as a saber-toothed tiger response. We had to jump at 100 shadows to get away from that one saber-toothed tiger. Or if a hostile tribe member was attacking us, to fight that hostile tribe member. So, flight from the saber-toothed tiger, fight off the hostile tribe member. That's the fight or flight response.
Right.
In our modern environment, that's not a good response in the large majority of business situations. Now imagine that a customer is providing you with some constructive critical feedback. What's the tempting thing to do? The intuitive thing to do? What feels right? Well, what feels right depends on your personality. If you're more of the flight personality, the tempting thing to do is to shut down and ignore that, to be kind of let it pass by, stick your fingers in your ears, blah, 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 I can't hear this, whatever, it's not happening. Delete the email from the customer. It's very tempting, it's very intuitive, it feels right for those people who are more flight response. Now, for other people with the other personality, with a fight response, and that's more like me, the temptation is to be aggressive in return, to write back to the customer saying, what are you talking about? You're wrong, I'm right, you're a jerk, I'm great.
Right.
That's the tempting thing to do. That's people who have more of the fight response. And many entrepreneurs are more in the fight response camp. So sometimes you get those sorts of interactions, they're not great. And that's one of the reasons for business failure, because you're not listening to your customers and not really providing them with good customer service. So if you look at the other reasons for business failure. And that is something that we have to fight against. We have to develop healthy mental habits that would be profitable. And if you want to help your bottom line survive and thrive, you need to, instead of either the flight response or the fight response, the response to customer complaints, you need to look at your business systems and processes and realize what are the underlying factors that led to this customer complaint. Because I can bet in the large majority of cases, it's not a one-off situation. It's not like a brick fell on somebody's head from top of the building and you had nothing to do with it. It's very likely a result. 99.9% of the cases, it's a result of your systems and processes causing a bad result, bad outcome in some sense. So you got to look at your systems and processes and see what led to this negative outcome, what led to this problem for the customer. And then you have to fix this. You have to go through the process of fixing it, addressing the problem, and then, of course, reply to the customer. Well, you want to reply to the customer when you identify the problem and say, hey, I figured out what the problem is. Here's the problem. Really sorry about this. Here's how we're going to solve it, and here's how we'll make it up to you. So you want to explain to the customer that you realize what is the underlying cause of the problem, not just say, I'm sorry. That's not going to cut it. And then say, of course, apologize, smooth ruffled feathers, and then say what you're going to do about it. That is a very hard thing to do. It's not intuitive at all. It's not easy. It requires calm self-reflection, calm looking at your systems, acknowledging you're wrong, which, so many people in this country pretty much can't acknowledge that they're wrong. It's very hard for people.
It seems to be the number one problem we have all over the world. Exactly.
Acknowledge that you're wrong and address. People have emotional intelligence and social intelligence in how you address other people, which is, again, pretty hard to do, understanding other people and connecting with them, trying to put yourself in their shoes. That is a hard, complex series of behaviors that is the ideal behavior. And I talk about more of these ideal behaviors in my book, and breaking down all of these complex behaviors into simplistic mental habits that you can develop and build on top of each other to make the best decisions and practices. Never go with your gut, how pioneering leaders make the best decisions and avoid business disasters. That's the book. But that is a hard thing to do, and we have to understand where our bad decision making comes from. It comes from how our brain is wired and our evolutionary environment.
Right. And a part of it too, I think I could say in personal experience and what I have seen is that because you're constantly told this is how things are done. So we've been wired from day one that this is the path, this is how you're going to act, and this is the responses that you give until, as you say, as you become an adult and you start to learn, okay, this is the difference between right and wrong. And a lot of people still don't want to admit when they're wrong and don't want to face that and don't want to, come out and just say, this is how I can do better to make things work or to have a better understanding. So because we're wired from the beginning of time, so to speak, talk a little bit about some of those ways to stop making those errors and those decisions, if you can give a couple more examples of that.
Sure. So I'm going to give you a 5-step process that, while not quite foolproof, it will help you avoid the large majority of disasters.
Okay.
There are 5 questions that are specifically, there is a specific technique where you use 5 questions for any decisions that you don't want to screw up, that you don't want to have a disaster. And this is for daily decision making. My book talks about a more involved process, 8-step process for serious decisions, where you want to hire a key employee, for example, and evaluate this employee, where you want to do a merger and acquisition, where you want to do something like invest into a new location, launch a new product. There's an 8-step process in the book. But there's a 5-step process, much quicker, takes only 2 minutes. You should be using it at least 2 to 5 times a day, 10 if it's a more intense day. So these are the questions you want to ask about any decision, daily decision, where you don't want to have a disaster. First question, what important information didn't I yet fully consider? So what evidence did you take into account? It's very tempting for us to look for evidence that only confirms our beliefs. We want evidence that causes us to be right, that causes us to feel right, that our initial assumptions and intuitions are right. It's very hard for us to question that. So this question asks you to do that. Look twice as hard at evidence that shows that you're wrong. If you can prove that you're right, that's great. But if you can prove that you're wrong, that's even better, because then you're not going to make a decision that leads to disaster. So that's the first question. Again, counterintuitive. Second, what dangerous judgment errors didn't I yet address? We don't tend to think about us as mistaken. We tend to think about ourselves as great, optimistically, right? Optimists, right? We think our plans are wonderful. But we know from the research that we're screwed up, our brain is screwed up in so many fun and twisted and interesting ways. So you want to learn about these dangerous judgment errors, these cognitive biases, and see which ones of them might be playing a role in each decision, and so that you don't screw them up. And my book talks about the 30 most dangerous ones. Third, what would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? So think about this angel on your shoulder. What would they suggest you do? You get about half of the benefit of this question just by asking it, because you take yourself outside of yourself. And of course, you get the other 50% of the benefit by calling this person, or if you're a millennial, texting this person. Fourth, how have I addressed all the ways this could fail? We really don't ask this question nearly well enough. How have you addressed all the ways this decision could fail? Think about all the problems, all the risks, and address them in advance, rather than kind of doing it the other way when a problem happens, trying to address it.
Right.
Finally, what would cause me to revisit this decision? What would cause you to change your mind? If you build that into your decision in advance, you want to think about all the factors that might cause you to change your mind, it'll be much easier for you to change your decision, especially if this is a team decision. So it'll be much easier for you to change your decision and make better decisions going forward. It took me only 2 minutes to talk that through, and it can save you many thousands of hours and many, many thousands of dollars if you use these techniques for any decision that you don't want to screw up.
Well, I definitely like that 5-step process. And you're right. I liked how you talked about the fact that it's doing things ahead of time versus always doing it after the fact. So instead of that constant reaction, you're being proactive. And they're very simple steps, and they can be utilized not just in your professional or your business life, but in your personal life. And so it's just enlightening to hear what you're talking about. But I do have a couple more questions before we end the show. I want to know, what challenges have you been faced with your theory and your understanding of cognitive biases?
Challenges with my understanding of cognitive biases. I guess when I make mistakes, that really helps me to realize that I'm falling into some of these cognitive biases. So the theory itself has not really been challenged. It's more about the way I apply it and the way I think about it. So there's a lot of counterintuitive things that I forget, and it's very easy for me to slip into optimism bias, especially. It's one of my biggest problems. So then I wake up, after I made a bad decision, and I realize, oh wait, I fell into my optimism bias. Let me backtrack and change my screw up. So fortunately, my wife, so she's a co-founder of Disaster Avoidance Expert. She has the opposite bias, the pessimism bias, which so she sees the world as more of a threat and as more of a risk-filled place. So I've learned over time that it's a really good idea, especially for significant decisions, for me to run them by her.
Smart man.
Get her feedback on them, and she'll point out all the problems, all the issues. I'll hand her my 20 brilliant ideas before breakfast, and she'll say, maybe these 3 ideas are worthwhile and we can pursue them. So
But that's
that's
great. That's
something
a
that
great
has been
balance.
very helpful for me.
Mm-hmm. That's a great balance, and I like that you two are able to do that, because you're right. If you have that giddy feeling every morning that this is the things that you need to do, and then she brings you back to reality. So
Yes,
that is a
exactly,
great balance,
exactly.
and that should be looked at in, like you said, not just business, but in your personal and professional life as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yep.
want to ask you another question. So obviously, we are on here talking about business, and so all my listeners, the number one question I always ask my guests is, what advice would you give someone who wants to go into business, beyond what we've been talking about tonight? What else would you explain to them and to think about as they decide to jump into business?
The most important thing to invest is investing into yourself and understanding your mind, yourself, because you are the heart of your business and you are the mind of your business. And our minds are screwed up in so many ways. You want to understand your particular screw-ups. You want to understand which cognitive biases are particularly dangerous for you. I have learned that the optimism bias and several others, and sunken costs and planning fallacy and a number of others, are the ones that I'm most vulnerable to. And you, as you're going into the business, you want to learn what you're most vulnerable to. And then you can plan around that. You can plan around, you can bring somebody into your business if you're too optimistic, which the vast majority of people are, so you can bring somebody in who will hold your feet to the ground, and other ways that you can address these problems. The crucial thing is self-awareness. Self-awareness, self-awareness, this is so important. I mean, this is the first step, I'd say, but before product, before everything else, you want to be aware of yourself, what kind of person you are, and the kind of steps that you will take to address your weaknesses, because everyone has them.
Absolutely. Boy, I couldn't have said that better myself. So, wow, this conversation has been amazing. We could probably go for another hour or two, but unfortunately that is not going to happen this evening. But I definitely want to have to bring you back on my other show and talk more just specifically on the books. I have a show called The Author's Corner, so we'll have to do this again. But before you leave on to the show this evening, out of the show, could you please tell the listeners how they can get a hold of you, and tell us if you have any events coming up or anything that you got going on new that you'd like to share with the listeners this evening?
Sure. So you can get my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, in bookstores all around you. It's published by a great traditional publisher called Career Press. Now, if bookstores around you happen to be closed or happen to be virus-filled, you can go online and get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, various other locations. You can get it in digital, in physical, and in audiobook form at audible.com. My own resources are available at disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, that's disasteravoidanceexperts.com. There's blogs, videos, podcasts, decision guides, manuals, virtual consulting, coaching, training, online courses of various sorts. And talking about online courses, there's a special free online course located with 8 video-based modules on making the wisest decisions. It's at disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. So check that out. Again, a free course, 8 video-based modules on making the wisest decisions at disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe.
Wow. All right, you guys have heard this live. Dr. Gleb, thank you so much for coming on with me this evening. This has been a wonderful experience and just a knowledge of wealth here. A wealth of knowledge, should I say. So, I mean, I'm just sitting here like overwhelmed with all the information you provide, but a lot of the things that you talked about this evening are very simplistic. It's just that we, like I said, our brains are so wired differently, and we just constantly go in that same vicious circle of doing the wrong things. But I love how you broke everything down, and I absolutely appreciate you coming on to the show this evening. And again, we'll have to get together again and have you come back so you can continue to talk about this, because this is very interesting, and I'm hoping that all the listeners this evening have learned something new about themselves and how they deal with their own behaviors, and especially the cognitive biases that we deal with every day. So again, Dr. Gleb, thank you so much for coming on the show this evening.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Kimberly. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right. And for everyone else, as you know, we are here every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. We're predominantly on iHeartRadio and Spotify. And of course, we're on 12 other new platforms. We also have a new mobile app that you can download through Google Play. And of course, we also have a Purple and Pink fundraiser program that we do every year for breast cancer awareness and domestic violence. And during the month of October, please think about donating to our cause because as most people who do know me are aware that I am a domestic violence survivor, and it's very close to my heart that I get involved in. I like to provide funds available for all of for different community awareness programs throughout the Virginia area where I'm located in. So again, please, if you go to my website at www.wsbillc.com to donate to our cause, and 20% of those funds will go directly to both of those unique awarenesses for breast cancer awareness and domestic violence. And then, of course, the rest of the funds goes directly to the podcast shows that we provide here on our platform. But again, if you are also interested in being a part and want to be a guest on the show, all you have to do is send me a simple short bio and then, of course, a professional picture. And you can send that to Kimberly, WSBILLC at gmail.com. And we can get you scheduled in for 2021 because we are completely filled for the rest of this year. But again, I do appreciate having Dr. Gleb Tsipursky on my show this evening. And we will see you all next week at Thursday at 7 p.m. Good night.
Good night, everyone. We will be back next Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Follow us on Spreaker, www.spreaker.com/user/WSBI. View our new WSBI website anytime at www.wsbillc.com and on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.